Hello, my name is David Stern, and this is my Info 375 final project presentation, the security status of the United States electric grid. Infrastructure overview of the American electric grid. Power stations will take nuclear, solar, wind, or other types of energy, harness them, and convert it to electricity with generators. Power substations step down from the transmission grid to the distribution grid for us through high voltage transmission lines. Typical consumers will receive it in single phase, while businesses and other large companies will receive it in three-phase. It comes in as 120 volts AC, 60 Hz frequency. If necessary, transformers can bump up the voltage for higher power requirements or distances. The supply must always exceed use and respond to shifting demand to ensure it doesn't get overloaded. It's stored hydroelectrically and electromechanically. In total, around the world, there is 154 gigawatts of capacity. This picture shows the transmission grid of the United States. The darker lines represent higher usage, and the lighter lines represent lighter usage. And now the list of assets on the electric grid. ISOs and RTOs are responsible for electricity distribution. The power plants and fuel suppliers provide the energy and electricity itself. There are public power lines, transformers, and other connections and hardware. There are servers with computing equipment and software on them. The software being Siemens PLCs for the automated substations that are responsible for generation, transmission, and distribution. They also have SCADA networks on them, which is the program that handles everything. However, to find out the values, it's difficult to quantify. So there was a study done with simulations. The study was done by Rutgers University, which modeled a section of the electric grid using the Pacific Gas and Electric's medium-sized sample and removed various substations to see what kind of impact it would have. This picture shows the sample that they used. They took a section of the electric grid that was available to them and they modeled all the substations. They removed contact from different substations and calculated the amount of load that was lost. You can calculate the number of megawatt hours times the $150 it costs per megawatt roughly, and you can figure out which substation has which value in this specific example. For example, if a terrorist attack, let's say, took out substation 9, you would lose 947,226 megawatt hours of load. And if you wanted to find out how much money that's worth, you multiply that by $150, and you'd see that's over $142 million in damages. And now a list of vulnerabilities. So obviously, the electric grid has an aging infrastructure, the equipment is getting older, the engineering is therefore outdated, and the layout is obsolete. There is human error and ineptitude, as is with everything, as evidenced by recent events, when a Vermont electric company was brought offline because a high-level official clicked on a phishing scam. There are faults, which are safety mechanisms designed to trip when too much current is detected. There are mechanical failures or other physical failures that may be present. And there's something called cascading. Cascading is when one section of the grid is ill-equipped to handle a massive amount of power demand, so it tasks the next part of the grid to handle it. And if it keeps failing to meet this demand, it acts like a domino effect where each section of the grid over and over can't meet it, and so everything fails in sequence. Another vulnerability is federal inaction, where deregulation has allowed companies to stop following the rules very closely. There's minimal funding required to meet all these vulnerabilities, and legislation has stalled, so they can't provide the funding in Congress to resolve these vulnerabilities. There's also, in certain instances, a lack of preparedness and communication for emergency response teams. And also, in some situations, there's outdated software. Recently, there was a ransomware attack in which something called WannaCry and a couple years ago something called SafeNet were both viruses that exposed and exploited weaknesses in old Windows software that companies didn't update. And obviously, going with human error again, there are ignorant utility companies that don't analyze attack patterns, don't do what they're supposed to, don't communicate threat intelligence or data share, and they don't closely monitor and report suspicious activity, which also goes with deregulation. This picture is a satellite picture of the Northeast United States in 2003, when there was a large power failure all up and down the East Coast due to a number of factors that I'm going to go into that resulted in millions of people being without power for an extended period of time. In 2003, there was a perfect storm of a bunch of problems that resulted in the largest blackout in American history. There was mechanical trouble that caused several generators to fail, and the power lines that were designed to pick up the slack sagged because of too much current and tripped from contacting trees. The overload was overlooked due to poor monitoring, and a domino effect occurred where the cascading that I mentioned previously occurred. 50 million people along the East Coast lost power for an extended period of time. Another threat is bad weather and natural disasters. They're constantly occurring with varying impact. One study said it took 2 to 3 days to restore Arizona State University servers, but obviously every situation is unique. There is the threat of an EMP, or an electromagnetic pulse, and a solar flare is just an EMP that naturally occurs. How they are damaging is they create surges in semiconductors, which is what all modern electronics use. So the impact would be, one report says, a 12 to 18-month rebuild that could paralyze the United States and return us to the pre-industrial age, with 90% of Americans being dead within the first year, according to Fox News. However, there's a low probability this would happen because if another country launched such an attack against the United States, there would be swift and devastating response that could result in mutually assured destruction. Regarding a physical attack on the electric grid, over the last several years, the USA Today report said that one occurred every 4 days, which means a high probability, and the potential impact of millions being without power for days to weeks, depending on the severity. Regarding a cyber attack like Stuxnet, ransomware, phishing, denial of service, etc., one study says that there is an imminent danger, with the risk being the health of millions of Americans, and that there is a high probability and that it's likely. Another threat within the cyber attack genre is the SCADA network that controls the distribution of electricity throughout the United States. It's the program. There was a report that said, while attractive, there's no evidence that a major cyber incident is forthcoming. This picture from Fox News shows that an electromagnetic pulse, depending on the altitude, has the potential, if unleashed above central United States, to knock out all electronics within continental United States. Current safeguards in place include fuses and circuit breakers, which guard against electrical overloads and other hardware malfunctions, backup generators for emergency power supplies in the event of an unexpected outage, emergency response teams also in the event of an unexpected outage, usually weather-related, and elevating and isolating critical equipment is useful when there's flooding. PJM Interconnection LLC, an RTO, stated that their security policy maintains they have redundant facilities to protect against denial of service and other attacks that may take one of their facilities offline, continuous monitoring to look for any abnormalities, and information sharing to update everyone about the potential of any cyber threat. Training utility personnel can help mitigate the human error aspect. Weaponry discourages any EMP or military strike. Investing in alternative energy helps reduce the stress and load of the system, and security cameras, chain-link fences, and alarms are all defenses against physical attack. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was relatively lax until about 2013, when a group of snipers took out 17 transformers in San Jose in a coordinated attack belonging to Pacific Gas and Electrics. The commission immediately tightened up the rules, having utility companies and substations develop security plans for their infrastructure, adhere to audits, and strengthen security procedures. This slide is an example of a clean, renewable energy wind and solar farm. There are some feasible countermeasures that the current safeguards do not address with regards to the threats and the vulnerabilities. The smart grid is a modernized and upgraded electrical network that utilizes two-way digital communication and the Internet of Things to better react to shifting demand and provide better alerts to problems. In a recent study by the Department of Energy, they've encouraged us to adopt standards requiring integrated electricity security planning on a regional basis, keep the President informed, have periodic assessments of cybersecurity for pipelines and energy supplies, and increase funding for utilities, data collection, and emergency response. Additionally, there should also be more funds for grid modernizing and improvement, as well as being able to have sustained power through an attack. Currently, private companies are wary of sharing their private information. Utility companies can persuade them to stop blocking legislation that encourages information sharing for the good of national security. Insurance companies can also adjust their premiums to incentivize utilities and substations to update their security systems. The previously mentioned SCADA network program that manages the electric grid should utilize an anomaly-based intrusion detection system, which scans the system for any new abnormalities and alerts upon discovery of penetration. A Faraday cage is an enclosure to block electromagnetic fields and pulses, and would have to be large enough to uncover entire substations. This high-level picture illustrates how the smart grid automatically actively integrates and adjusts energy supply on the right and energy demand on the left more efficiently, informatively, and cleanly than the current grid. This is a list of all 16 of my references, with some of them being pictures. Thank you for listening to what I have to say.